Welcome to the ANEW Insight Podcast, empowering and inspiring your journey to optimal health. Hosted by Dr. Supatra Tovar, clinical psychologist, registered dietitian, fitness expert, and author of Deprogram Diet Culture. Rethink your relationship with food, heal your mind, and live a diet-free life. And Chantal Donnelly, physical therapist and author of Settled, How to Find Calm in a Stress-Inducing World. We follow our guests' journey to optimal health, providing you with the keys to unlock your own wellness path. Tune in and evolve with us. Hello and welcome to the ANEW Insight Podcast. I am Dr. Supatra Tovar, and sadly we do not have Chantal Donnelly with us today, but she is here in spirit. We are very excited to have menopause expert Lauren Chiren here with us today. Lauren is an accomplished professional dedicated to normalizing all things periods to post-menopause in the workplace and empowering individuals to thrive throughout this transformative phase. As the founder and CEO of Women of a Certain Stage, she leads a team of associates in educating large employers on menstruation and menopause while implementing systems to support and retain top talent. With a background in psychology, sports therapy, and nutrition, and a wide range of coaching certifications, including personal training, health, life, mastery, and transformational coaching, Lauren brings a comprehensive skill set to her work. She is also certified in various areas such as spinal rehabilitation, knee rehab, mental health, menopause, nutrition, first aid, and DISC, D-I-S-C, which is a personal development certification. Her membership in prestigious organizations such as the Royal Society of Medicine, the International Menopause Society, and the Association of Business Mentors further demonstrates her commitment to excellence. Lauren, we are so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. Well, during this podcast, it's very important for us to understand kind of your origin story. What, inspired you to get into this type of work? I know that you have a background in finance, but what led you to switching things up and creating Women of a Certain Stage?
Yeah, it definitely found me. I wasn't looking to do this at all. I was senior leader in financial services. I was sole parent with a child with lifelong medical needs, so spending a lot of time sleeping in children's hospital with him and then going to work during the day and being very well supported by an amazing nanny and support, network here in Bristol in the UK. And at the time, I was just finding life's juggling act a little bit trickier. And the obvious thing was putting it down to being a sole parent, unintended sole parent, and having a child that was sick and juggling a senior career. I didn't really question it. And after a couple of years, I found myself really struggling to speak up in meetings. So I would sit in a board meeting, I'd be the only female in the room, and I would have to sip hot water to be able to relax my throat muscles enough to be able to squeak out the smallest of sentences. And other times I would look at a colleague who had headhunted and I would be, I know her name. And I couldn't remember somebody's name, someone that I had worked with for years. And there were just little things like that. There was one time I nearly passed out in front of someone's office. I'm standing in front of 400 seat open plan office, waiting to go into a meeting with the finance director. And the next thing I know, the room is just moving around me. And before I know it, I'm lying on the floor with my feet in the air, which is hysterical because I was wearing a skirt suit and high heels. You can just picture the scene and 400 colleagues looking at me. And one of my colleagues happened to be a part-time paramedic outside of work. So thankfully, he was standing there, caught me, put me in that recovery position. And I was like, okay, something is seriously wrong. So after about 18 months of not feeling quite right, I decided that I didn't want to be seen as weak or vulnerable at work. I was worried I had early onset dementia. I thought I'd have to get someone to bring up my son. And I left work. And then I found it was just menopause. It was just a premature menopause at 37.
Oh my goodness. So it really hit you hard and it hit you early. And that must have been very disorienting. And I'm so sorry to hear about your son and his struggles, and I hope that he's doing well. But that must have been a big jolt. And so kind of walk me through how you quit your job, found out it was menopause, and then how did that lead you into what you're doing today?
Well, I genuinely thought that if my colleagues thought I wasn't up to the job, that I would be on a performance plan or something else would happen. And I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to be seen as weak and vulnerable. I'd been headhunted for my job. And I left because I just thought I need to get out of here while I've still got enough of my ability, my mental ability to make decisions and figure out how I can find someone to bring up my son. So I went to my doctor initially, and he said, really, this was before I left work, and he said, look, you really need some time off. You've just had a new baby. You've become a sole parent unexpectedly. You're running a senior leadership role. You don't have a support network. You need to take some time off. This is why these companies have, these policies to support people to get back on their feet. And I was, no, don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And he's like, you need a month off. And I was like, oh no, I've never taken a day off since I was 14. I'm not going to take a month. We
Wow.
negotiated in a week, and he signed me off with low mood. He said, you're not suffering from depression. You don't have the signs of depression. He goes, you're stressed. And he turned around and he said to me, Lauren, if you carry on the way you are, working the hours you're doing, looking after your son, and all the other things that I was doing at the time, he goes, you're going to burn out and you'll end up in hospital. And then who's going to look after your son? And that got my attention. So, long story short, I eventually left work. I left my job, and two more doctor's appointments. He did a set of blood tests, and they came back showing very high follicle stimulating hormone both times. He questioned me about when my last period was, and we realized I hadn't had one since I'd had my son. But I'd fed my son for a year when I first had him, and then I'd been on contraceptive pill that meant it masked my periods, and then I hadn't been on the pill for a while because various things had been going on. And I was like, oh, I actually haven't had a bleed since I had my son. So we think that I went straight from childbirth into menopause. And as soon
Wow.
as he told me that, I was the happiest menopausal woman in the UK. I was like, I have to stop anyone else from going through this, right? I need to stop
Right.
any other employers from not understanding how to support, notice signs and provide support for colleagues. So that was
Yes.
that was the beginning of me starting to think about, not as a business, but just me thinking about what can I do to stop anyone else from going through this. I'd walked away from a
Wow.
six-figure career. I was sitting at home, not earning any money as a sole parent, and I thought, no, this is not right.
Oh, this is amazing. So, I love how so many origin stories are born out of a, major difficulty and, something that's really kind of life shattering, but it ends up being perhaps the best thing to ever happen to somebody. You have claimed to be the happiest menopausal woman in the world, which is, I think, probably a singular statement, although I'd have to say I'm pretty happy during menopause too. How did you get there? If menopause was so debilitating before, how did you become happy? And then how did you formulate your company out of that
Yeah,
happiness?
amazing. So yeah, the company was definitely accidental. I'm an accidental CEO for sure. The reality was the minute my doctor said to me, you're just menopausal, it was such a relief not to have early onset dementia. And that made me kind of so happy, so joyful, so relieved. And it was one of those things where I just wanted to reach out to lots of people. So we got a group of people together. I collaborated with a local charity, and they had premises. They provided hot drinks and snacks. We advertised, we got women together. We started talking about menopause, and I realized I wasn't alone.
Wow.
In those kind of menopause socials, as we call them, some of the people there were quite senior in local businesses and global businesses like Airbus and other, like banks and oil and gas companies. And they were, can you come and talk to us? So before I knew it, I was running these socials and I was talking to these companies. And then we started looking at the strategy. And I realized in that moment that I had the strategy and the strategic aspect from the corporate work I'd done, but I also had a background in psychology, in personal training, sports therapy, nutrition, in so many different things that were incredibly relevant. So I started building my qualifications. I thought at the time the main thing I could do would be provide coaching. But before I knew it, I started training people to do what I was doing, supporting other organizations to think about how they can change their colleague journey. And we're 10 years into, well, nearly 11 years into the journey now. So yeah, it's been a blast. I've traveled all over the
Wow.
world doing talks, and training. It's just been great fun.
Well, it's so necessary because I think that there are so many misconceptions when it comes to mental health and menopause and this time in our life. So, speaking of mental health and menopause, how are those two related? You said that you were experiencing some brain fog. What other, low mood, I think you had kind of mentioned before as well. Give me an idea of how menopause affects our mental health.
I think everyone's journey is different. That's one of the most important things to recognize. And I didn't have the traditional kind of hot flushes and those types of things. I found that the majority of symptoms I had were a lack of sleep. So that was my biggest issue. I would have dreadful night sweats to the point where I slept in a bath towel and I would just change the bath towel out because it was easier and quicker than changing the bed linen. And if I got sleep, it would be about an hour and a half to 2 hours for about 18 months.
Wow.
So that lack of sleep left me hyperactive. So I started overtraining, working harder and longer hours. And, most people get really fatigued and tired. I just went hyper. And it was fascinating. It just didn't dawn on me that it was menopause. But that led me to being like tired and wired. So I was in that kind of constantly wired state, hyper alert, hypersensitive, hyper everything, and
Wow.
super sensitive to everything and anything anyone said to me. So I think when you study it, and I know we'll come to this later, but when you start looking at estrogen, progesterone, and the roles that they play in the body, then you can start to understand when your hormone levels are out of sync, out of their normal synchronous cycle, that they are going to be playing with your brain chemistry and your body chemistry, that your physiology
Mm.
is physically changing, and therefore your normal flow of mood throughout the month or whatever your cycle's like is going to be disrupted. And we have
Yes.
to start recognizing that so that we know how to look after ourselves so that that doesn't become problematic. But at 37, 38, 39, 40, I was completely clueless that that was menopause. And also, I would guess that my progesterone levels must have been super, super low because I never switched off.
Yes.
I never felt calm. I never got any sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And progesterone plays such a big role in that. So when you're not sleeping and you're very wired all the time, your anxiety levels start going through the roof. You can become quite paranoid. I was
Mm.
catastrophizing everything going on around me. And
Yes.
someone just had to look at me the wrong way. And I would be like, reading between the lines.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't really mean that, so they meant this. They didn't really
Yes.
mean, and it became so that I was so tense. I was going for massages every week and reflexology every week to try and de-stress. And it worked for the time I was in the appointment, but it didn't have any lasting impact. So it
Yes.
wasn't until after work that I put two and two together. But you'll know yourself, when you're not sleeping, it's like torture. And
Absolutely.
there was one day, have I got time for a little story?
Oh, of course. We
One
love
day I came
stories.
home, I came home from dropping my son at school, and I came home and I live across the road from a school. It's not the one my son goes to, but I live across the road from a school, and the street was rammed with cars. And I had an appointment. I couldn't find anywhere to park my car. So I was driving up and down and round the block, and I'm thinking, I'm going to be late, I'm going to be late, going to be late. And there were these two men standing across the road from where these cars were parked, blocking my house. And I was getting more and more frustrated, more and more irate. And eventually I dropped my car somewhere and ran back to the house. And I just burst into tears. And I
Wow.
literally was on bended knee on the kitchen floor, beating the living daylights out the kitchen floor, just wishing that I could stop. I
Wow.
just wanted out.
That must have been
And all I could think
devastating.
was my son was safe, he was at school, there were good people looking after him, and I was done. So,
Wow.
from a mental health point of view, I would say that we don't talk about the links between mental health, menopause, and suicide ideation. And I definitely was very fortunate. I have a cat, and she came along and started headbutting me. And before I knew it, I
Oh.
was sitting crying with her in my lap, and I was fine. And
Oh.
that was the moment I realized I needed to do something really different to look after myself.
Oh my
And
goodness.
yeah,
Yes.
so
Pets are magical, aren't they?
yeah.
They're just incredible. They know when we need them and they come
Hmm.
and they help us. And it's
Hmm.
so incredible to have a bond
Yeah.
like that. But what a horrible moment you had.
Mm.
And that must have just been, really devastating. And it is a clear example of, I think one of the common misconceptions about menopause is people don't think about the mental health effects. Give our listeners an idea of some of the other misconceptions. I think a lot of people think, oh, it's just, a bunch of hot flashes and then your period stops. But that's not menopause. Menopause is, very individual for each person. Yeah. Give us some of these misconceptions.
Sure. I think for me, when you understand what estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone do, you can really understand why people's confidence can fall through the floor. And that one superwoman who was able to juggle all life's juggling act, suddenly, the estrogen levels are falling, so her cognitive functions are just struggling, and that ability to connect the words and get the words out of the head into the room can be challenged. Or the fact that estrogen helps every single tissue in our body to work properly, and our skin, our biggest organ, all our soft tissues, our mucous membranes, our vaginal walls and linings, our vulval lining, everything, our bladder is all linked with our estrogen levels. So when you start understanding the roles that our hormones play, you can see why these things start for some people not to function so well without the right help and support. And I'm always saying it like that because I don't want people to think, oh, it's all doom and gloom, because this is the whole point of these conversations, is to prove that it doesn't have to be doom and gloom. With the right education and the right support, we can carrying on. And that's what's exciting. So I think, I remember coaching a client, and 3 weeks in a row, she came in complaining that, her ear was itchy and she had a dry eye, and she was putting it down to menopause symptoms. And on the third week, I said, look, it's been too consistent. The dry eye's been really consistent. There hasn't been an up and down, which would say to me, and I'm not a doctor, but, it would say to me that maybe there's something else worth investigating here. And it turned out after one appointment with her doctor and some ointment, it got cleared up in 2 days. It was just an infection. So we have to be open to, getting these things checked out and listening to our bodies and not putting everything down to it. But that kind of, becoming sensitive to certain foods or, gut issues, bowel issues, lots of things can be linked back to our experience of menopause.
Wow. Well, it's really interesting to note that it is a difference in the variation of our hormones, primarily testosterone, progesterone, and estrogen. So with your symptoms, where were you in terms of your hormones? Low estrogen, low progesterone, low everything?
We don't know, because I was never tested. I was just tested for FSH. So we never really went into it. It was just a case of, well, you're the guidelines in the UK are, if you're under 45, you go on to hormone replacement therapy until you're the average age of menopause, which in the UK is 51. I tried HRT. It made me very, very sick. And I unfortunately didn't know back then what I know now about HRT. I might have made a very different decision. So I literally had it for a very short time, but that was just enough for me to get back, like, feeling my old self. I'm probably much more confident now than I've ever been in my life. So yeah, it's life the other side of menopause is very, 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 very good and different.
Oh, this is good. I'm sure that brings hope to a lot of people. It certainly brings hope to me. I will admit my journey. I think I had higher levels of estrogen in my 40s, which I think kept me from developing a lot of these really debilitating, the night sweats and the hot flashes and things like that. And I did also make a lot of dietary changes, which we'll talk about in the second half of this this podcast episode. But give me an idea of, the work that you're doing out in the workplace. You're working with employers so that they can support women better. And I think this is, oh my goodness, so vital, because I don't think a lot, everything's primarily still, a lot of male-driven industries, and they don't have an understanding of this time. And I think don't really have as much empathy or compassion as they could. Is that what you are doing in terms of your education with employers?
It's very varied depending what type of industry I'm working with. But I live in an area in the UK which is very aerospace based, so there are very few women. And I still go and do lunch and learns for the men, and they love it. They love finding out what their wives are going through, how they can support them. And I had one gentleman, he'd been working there for 40 years, and he was just about to divorce his second wife. And he said to me, she's going the same way as the last one. She's gone off
Oh boy.
sex. And I was like, what? What do you mean you're divorcing her because she's gone off sex? And he goes, well, a relationship's got to be more than. Anyway, I wasn't going to debate the philosophies behind a relationship, but I just said, look, listen to today's session and then tell me what you think afterwards. At the end of the session, he turned around and said, oh my goodness, I know now that I can support her and it's something we can work together on.
Yay! You saved
And I
their
was like,
marriage.
oh my gosh, that's amazing. Every year on the anniversary of that session, he sends me an email to tell me about the wonderful celebration they're doing that year to celebrate the change in his attitude and him being open to talking to her.
Oh my goodness. This is so necessary. You need to be out here in the States doing this too. Are
I
you?
am. Yeah,
Oh,
I've just come back
good.
from New York. Yeah.
Yay! Oh, good. We need this. I think having, not just for employers, but for, our partners in general to be as supportive and caring and empathetic and helpful as they can be, getting people through this stage, that's what we need.
Yeah.
Give me an idea, though, of, some of your strategies to help combat menopause burnout. That's, I think, what you were experiencing.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's things that you did for yourself, but what are some strategies for women who are experiencing this themselves?
I think the last question is very pertinent because most of us aren't brought up learning about menopause, so we have to provide that education in the workplace. So having our employers deliver general awareness sessions, train managers on the right language, how to spot the signs, how to open those conversations, provide support, all of that is important. But also simple things, being aware that menopause might be experienced by our transgender, non-binary, gender questioning people as well, and having our bathrooms set up so that, if someone's using a menstrual cup, they're not in a communal bathroom that they have to then go and rinse that out in a communal area. So we need to
Yes.
think, I help employers think smartly about their entire colleague journey from job design through recruitment, onboarding, right the way through the whole colleague life cycle and just tweak some changes that are usually fairly inexpensive for them to implement. And that means that if someone's working in an environment where they are talking about menopause, it can help someone feel more confident to then find a trusted colleague to say, hey, look, I'm having these challenges. It would be really helpful if. So we can support people to keep symptoms lists, have the right dialogue with their managers, their partners, their doctors. And then we take people through something called the Menopause Plan, which is our signature coaching framework. And that can be done as a conversation, as a series of sessions or workshops. And we look at mindset. We're going to go through menopause anyway. So we might as well embrace it and figure out what it is and what we can do about it. We're stepping into our superpower. We're so rich in skills, knowledge, and experience. And I want people to really embrace, just how much they've achieved over their life. I think that's really important, just so that they can remind themselves how incredible they are. And then we look at hydration. It's the number one easiest thing for anyone to make an improvement in. If we're well hydrated, we focus better, our mood's better, our joints are better, we're less bloated, we're less constipated. It helps everything, 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 everything.
As I take my sip of water. Maybe that's why I haven't had so much burnout, because I keep a bottle of water. I'm always drinking water or tea or just anything throughout the day. And it does really help with, your cognition, helps to decrease burnout, keeps you focused, the whole deal. So I love that. That's really simple. Are there any other simple tips that you can give people?
So, definitely. So the mindset and the hydration come first because they're the easiest things for people to implement and it doesn't cost anything. So then we start inviting people to think about what's their daily routine like? Where can they start to implement a good morning and evening routine to basically free themselves up and give themselves 2 to 5 minutes to focus on their priorities for the day ahead, to reflect on the day just gone and do their gratitude or whatever works for them, just to have that moment to get out of sympathetic, fight, flight, freeze into that parasympathetic state. And when they build that muscle and get used to doing that, we can work with them to increase that, because we're so bad at looking after ourselves.
Yes.
So that's important. Then the next big thing that we do is we invite people to find 7 days in their schedule where they're in control of what they're eating. Yes. And that can be easier said than done. but to find the 7 days when they're genuinely in control of what they're eating, and we take them on a journey to reduce or eliminate their caffeine, their alcohol, their red meat, their processed foods, their refined sugars over a few days or a couple of weeks, and then for 7 days to maintain that, and just notice how they feel. And then they go into right? Then they go into a reintroduction phase, and then they can find out which foods are draining their energy, which foods are giving them a spike of energy and then leaving them depleted, which foods are making their symptoms worse. And that way, we're not saying you must or you must not ever eat this or that. We're saying now you've got the knowledge, you can choose what to eat and when, knowing how you're going to feel the next day. And I love, oh my gosh, I get tingles every time someone completes that plan, because
I can imagine.
Yeah.
This is my area. We're out of time for this part of this episode, but we're going to come back and go right into that, because you just got all my juices flowing, because this is one of my main areas of interest and where I help people, because I'm a dietitian, as well as a psychologist. So we are going to get into the juicy bits of diet in relation to menopause, because there's a lot that women can do that they're not aware of, that they're not taught. And this is really valuable information. So we really hope that you come back and listen to the second half of this amazing interview with menopause wellness guru, Lauren Chiren. We hope you join us next time. Thank you so much for joining us this time.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the ANEW Body Insight Podcast. Please remember, the content shared on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. You can find us anywhere podcasts are streaming, on YouTube at my.anew.insight and at anew-insight.com under the ANEW Body Insight Podcast tab. Follow us on our socials at my.anew.insight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads for more updates. Tune in next time and evolve with us.